Our guest is joining us in the studio. His name is Grant Loebs. Some of you are familiar with him. He is, of course, the prosecutor here in Twin Falls County, Idaho, and comes in on a monthly basis and chats with us about some legal issues. He's also available to take some of your telephone calls because keep in mind, prosecutor also means he's a lawyer. He knows a little bit about the law. He did go to law school and has some background in a great many areas. If you've got a question or comment for him while he's in the studio, remember the telephone number is 736-0300. You're also listening to Top Story with Bill Colley on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. I didn't see you in December because I was away on vacation, so didn't get a chance to chat at the time. I assume things went well.
They went well. I was here, and Steve was running things for you, and we had a good time.
He's going to be back in a couple of weeks, just while I move into a new house. So he'll be, when he returns from, what is it, down under?
I don't know where he went, a cruise somewhere or something,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
Vacation, I don't know.
He might be back already. We'll see him, I think, in a few days back in the studio. But first of all, welcome back. We were chatting via email yesterday about a number of issues. And if I could, as a jumping off point, there's an argument going on. Randy Staple has brought it up to me a couple of times in the last month with this need for public defenders and cost of that. And some of the smaller counties in Idaho, which clearly, if you've got a population of 1,000 people in your county, coming up with a lot of these extras, not easy. And of course, we go back to, what was it, Clarence Earl Gideon, when we first heard about having an assigned counsel for someone who couldn't afford one. Is this thing, it's not a problem, obviously, in Twin Falls County, but is there a legitimate concern here?
Well, there's always a legitimate concern that public defenders are provided at the appropriate time because the Supreme Court case, as well as the Constitution, tells you, you have to provide attorneys for those who can't afford an attorney. So there's always a concern that they be provided at the appropriate time to the appropriate people and that they be appropriately trained. I mean, it's no good to provide an attorney to someone if that attorney doesn't know what they're doing. So there are some legitimate concerns in the state of Idaho with making sure that public defenders are available and well trained. That having been said, this bizarre panic about it is amazing to me. Having served on two of the three committees, not the legislative one, obviously, because that's for legislators, who looked into this issue in great detail. I'm always shocked when people say it's unconstitutional, that Idaho's system is unconstitutional. Nobody's ever said that. Nobody's ever decided that. Even the governor said that in last year's State of the State address, and the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court said it in his State of the Court address. It's just not true. There are problems with our system, as I'm sure there are with every system you could find. Those problems, I think, could easily be fixed without spending $5 million or $10 million or estimates about what a statewide public defender system is going to cost, run into the $50 million range. There are, as you pointed out, counties like Twin Falls do a very good job with this. We have a good public defender's office. They're paid well, they're trained well. It's a standalone office that runs itself, and they appear when they're needed. There are smaller counties where that isn't quite true, but it's because they don't have an office themselves. What they do is contract with local lawyers to do it. And so some of the problems that have been mentioned could be solved by requiring counties to have standalone offices where people just do public defender work. And in counties where they can't do that because there isn't enough business, like Camas County, for instance, they could easily contract with Gooding County or Jerome County or a conglomerate of other counties to form an office that serves a larger number of counties. And then obviously training pay needs to be, you need to pay for training. But none of that should run you into the multi-millions of dollars. This new panic about the public defender system is an attempt to create a statewide bureaucracy run from Boise that will dictate to everybody everywhere how they do their work and will have a huge price tag. And it's just, there's no need for it.
I recall, gosh, I must have been junior or senior in high school, and they took us to the county seat on a career day, and we got to drop into a law office. And the fellow who ran the office, he was recently out of law school. So, and that oftentimes the public defenders are younger folks like that.
Hmm.
And he pointed around the room and said, "All of these books on my shelves." Of course, I don't now with computers, and you don't necessarily need all the books. But he told us about the expenses of setting up his
Hmm.
office, and he said, "There's an impression that as soon as you get out of law school, you've got a license to print money." He said, "But I had to buy all these books.
Hmm.
I'm not making a lot of money in the assigned counsel pool, and so the first few years that you practice law," he said, "are very difficult." So he was making a pitch, obviously, that the program needed to be better.
Hmm.
This is 40 years ago, of course, but uh, we if we have a statewide office, they're going to be running people all over the state. Then, if there's a need for someone in a particular county, Owyhee or somewhere, they just send them out, right? That's how that would work.
Well, that's one model. I mean, and there are people who realize, people in the legislature who realize that that would be extraordinarily expensive, and they're trying to craft right now what the future of the public defense system in Idaho is going to look like. Is it going to be a statewide office? Is it going to be some local offices and some state offices? Is it going to be local offices but dictated to by the state, and with money provided to create public defender offices where they don't exist? We don't know for sure. But the question of, and you highlighted it just there in that comment. Public defenders, at least beginning public defenders, are often young lawyers, often recently out of law school, who see this as a good job to get experience, to learn how the court system works. And obviously that's true of prosecutors too. A lot of the people I hire are right out of law school, and it's a job where they can kind of learn, starting with simpler cases and graduating to more difficult cases. And public defenders are the same. There's a lot of criticism of public defenders. I hear it from defendants and I hear it from the public. Oh, they're, all kinds of derogatory names. They're not real lawyers. And the fact is that public defenders are the only people that do criminal law full time from the defense side, and often are the best trained, the best equipped, the best of, prepared on criminal law issues, because they do it all day long. And the ones that are in full time offices, that's especially true of. Now, in places where they're contracted, sometimes you get a person who's doing wills and divorces all week, and he takes time off to go do some public defender work. So there is a need for training, whether it's for those contract people or for brand new people who become public defenders. But you're not going to solve that either with a statewide office, because you're still going to have new people coming out of law school going into that profession. And one more point that's interesting, and that is we talk about all these standards and the need for experience, the need for training, the need for this, that, and the other. If you go to an attorney who you find in the yellow pages, no standards at all, doesn't need to be trained at all. You can pick a guy out of the yellow pages to represent you on a rape case, and he will maybe never have done anything in his life that has to do with criminal law. Nobody's paying attention to that. It's all focused on public defenders, who are by and large the best trained and the best equipped to do this already.
You mentioned sometimes there are complaints about them, and I think that usually depends on what sort of outcome you get. There's a scene in the movie A Man for All Seasons where they bring in this woman. She's going to bear witness against Thomas More, and she said, "I got a wickedly bad judgment against me." And even though they're looking to get more, Thomas Cromwell looks at her and says, "No, you got an absolutely correct judgment." In other words, she didn't get what she wanted, so
Mm.
therefore things are bad.
Yeah. And, there a lot of the people that have public defenders don't win. And of course, they have that same feeling. But there's also a feeling, if it's free, if it's provided for me for free, how good can it be? And the answer to that is pretty darn good if it's a person who knows what they're doing and has been doing it for 15 or 20 years. So, it's there's a lot of misinformation about it. And there are differences from county to county, and that is largely because of this system in Idaho where one county can contract while the next one, creates an office. And I think that a lot of the problems and the disparities could be solved if you had each county either create an office that does nothing but public defense or go in with a neighboring county to do that.
We should point out too that the people who are in this program, that the lawyers, they cannot mail it in. I mean, they don't. This notion that, well, I'm getting this for free, they'll just come in and half-heartedly give me a defense. They're strictly governed, aren't they?
Well, sure. I mean, they have ethical rules. They have, again, if they're in an office, they have a person who manages the office who's watching what they do. And the judges monitor it as well. I mean, the judges don't want somebody represented badly and have the ability to stop somebody who's doing a bad job and, call their boss and, have them trained to do it properly. Or, I mean, it's hard for a judge to stop something while it's happening in the courtroom, but they keep an eye on that. So yeah, I mean, it's not like this is a completely unmonitored profession.
I would say probably one of the more regulated that you
Yeah,
could
it's
probably come across.
people pay a lot of attention to it,
Got about a minute and a half.
appropriately so.
About a minute and a half before the first break, and I do want to point out if people have a comment or question for Prosecutor Grant Loebs, give us a shout on the next segment of the program at 736-0300. That's 736-0300. And you're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. It's 27 at 9:18. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story this morning. We're going to get into a couple of other things, too, in a few minutes. Perhaps touch on the subject I was talking about in the first hour of the program and just some of the dangers we have out there and sometimes the public perception of criminals and people who are involved in various crimes. And if we have some time, too, we might touch on civil asset forfeiture because that's someone's making some noise about that here in the state of Idaho. That normally when
Sure.
legislative session comes around, I guess we see a lot of these things.
A lot of things come up.
And I will point out that the Heritage Foundation, which Grant Loebs is familiar with from his time in Washington, has also been making a lot of noise about civil asset forfeiture. And they usually on a weekly basis highlight a case around the country which they say is an abuse. I suspect, though, from your perspective, you can always find one case out of perhaps tens of thousands and make some hay with it.
Sure. On almost any subject.
We've got more coming up in just a couple of minutes. Do want to point out weather forecast this morning. Looks like we will have some rain during the course of the day, snow tomorrow, but otherwise we're in a period we might label the doldrums over the next several days with highs in the upper 30s to low 40s. A little rain, a little snow here and there, but otherwise nothing too serious to worry about, unlike some of our more eastward neighbors who are in the deep freeze right now. You're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Coming up on 20 minutes after 9 o'clock. I do hope you can stick around. Once again, that telephone number 736-0300. Our studio guest is the prosecutor in Twin Falls County, Idaho, Grant Loebs. Call it 924-26 at the studio. And you're listening to Top Story with Bill Colley on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Our telephone number 736-0300. We were talking off air about civil asset forfeiture. Two things. So you pointed out something to me. There's a federal program versus a state program, and these are two very different things at times.
Right. There's a federal program that, of course, when the FBI arrests you and when a U.S. attorney prosecutes you, then you're in the federal system. And completely different rules govern the federal system as govern each state system. And then, of course, each state has its own system. And within each state, there are some differences with these programs from county to county, depending upon how they're run. So, and you mentioned the Heritage Foundation. My guess is the Heritage Foundation analysis focuses mostly on the federal system, which has a lot more asset forfeiture capability. They seize a lot bigger assets. They work most of the bigger cases where somebody's got a house in Maui and a house in in the Hamptons and a corporate jet, and they use all of that for drug purposes. That would be all stuff the feds would do. Idaho has, of course, its own statutes. We follow not only Idaho law, but of course federal law. In terms of federal court decisions and Supreme Court decisions about how these programs have to be run. So it all depends what you're talking about. There's been some attack, of course, and like you said, the Heritage Foundation is probably one of those attacking the federal system. And then there is, based on that, an attack ongoing against the Idaho system. But complete failure by the people making that attack to understand it's a different system.
When you mention it's taking place here in Idaho, have and I guess that's the question: have there been any abuses they could point to that or are they after a straw man of some sorts?
Well, I can't say for sure. I mean, I can only speak for Twin Falls County. I keep track of what goes on in the state generally, but I can't say that in some county somewhere somebody hasn't done something that they shouldn't have done. But it's generally a straw man. It's generally the two arguments you usually hear are that there's a interest of a private person. For instance, I'm dealing drugs out of grandma's car. I borrowed grandma's car last week, and grandma hasn't seen the car since, and I'm dealing drugs out of grandma's car. And so you arrest me, you seize the car, you seize my money, you seize my gun, because that's typically what I have: money, gun, and a car. Now, if grandma comes in and says, "Wait a minute, I'm not a drug dealer. That's my car. My grandson borrowed it, and he's selling drugs out of it." Well, we don't seize the car then. The car goes back to grandma. And frankly, that's probably the only way grandma's going to see that car again, because she's not going to get it from drug dealing grandson. So that's one of the big issues that you hear. Oh, what about the innocent owner? Another thing, the accusation that we seize assets from people that have nothing to do with the drugs. Um, we found a guy selling drugs on the street, and we took his house and his car and his money and his guns. Well, that's not the way that works. You have to prove in these cases that there's a direct nexus that is a connection between the thing that you seize and the actual drug enterprise. And so you have to prove that. And if you don't prove that, then the judge says, "Well, you haven't proven that. I'm giving this guy, his property back." So the stuff that's seized is stuff that is specifically and directly being used to further the drug dealing enterprise. And so that's what you see in the civil asset forfeitures in Idaho. And the money that is seized, the property that is seized, is converted to save the taxpayers' money in fighting drug crime. So that's what you can use it for. If the police department gets money from a seizure, then they have to use it for something that's directly related to the expenses that they incur in prosecuting drug crimes. Same if the prosecutor uses it.
We have a caller with us just very quickly. We've got about a minute before the break, so you'll have time to get your question or comment out, and then we can address that on the other side of the commercial break. You're up next. You're on the air with Grant Loebs on KLIX.
Yeah, I have a quick comment about something that he said, and that was regarding giving the property back. I have a problem with that they took the property before they were actually associated with the thing. He can answer that after the break.
We've got about 30 seconds. Can you do it in 30 seconds, or do you want to
split it up? The property is taken when it's taken at the time that the person is arrested for the drug crime. So it's taken because it's seized in the drug crime investigation. It is given back if it's seized improperly. But the caller's right. I mean, it's seized at the time, just like the guy is arrested at the time, and then the state has to make its case, just like it does when we prosecute somebody for the crime itself.
But of course, if grandma comes in and says, "Here's the title of the automobile,"
gets it back.
Yeah, okay. Got more coming up with Grant Loebs. He's the Twin Falls County Prosecutor. You're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. It's 9:30. We're at 28. Bill Colley with you on Top Story as well. We had a mention of The Godfather off air earlier today, and look at this. At random, it comes up again.
There you go.
Grant Loebs is in studio with us. He's the Twin Falls County Prosecutor, 934. 29, and of course, you're listening to Top Story with Bill Colley on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Our telephone number, 736-0300, 736-0300. Maybe referring to the music from the movie, we had a conversation off air just about how culturally we have been moving more and more toward an acceptance of crime in this country, and that the prosecutor was listening to some of my comments in the first hour of the program about people's treatment of someone who is a meth dealer, and how some people see that person as some sort of a hero, or they're unwilling to look at the negatives and all of that. And a lot of this is culturally driven by entertainment, but also by some people in politics as well. You've got people who are being pardoned left and right for drug crimes by the president. They're going to be back on the street. A lot of these people don't have any other skill but selling drugs. And so we're looking at a potential future in this country where you better have a couple of deadbolt locks at your house.
Yeah, I don't like to make dire predictions, and of course things can change overnight. But I think we have to be concerned about some of the policies that we're enacting now out of fear for full jails, and this myth that drug dealers are nonviolent criminals, or that people are being sent to prison because they're nonviolent drug offenders. Almost no one goes to prison whose only crime is a drug offense, certainly a possession offense in Idaho. But we're making all these policies to change the way we handle these crimes. And the reason that we have as safe a community as we do, and as safe a state as we do, and the low crime rate that we do, is because we are able to aggressively fight these kind of crimes before they become even bigger. And obviously, I've been here long enough to remember Twin Falls County before methamphetamine was even a word anybody knew. And the crime rate has spiked so dramatically since meth came to Twin Falls County. I think people forget that. I think they think that the rate that we have now is just kind of normal, run-of-the-mill, everyday crime rate. It's the crime rate with methamphetamine added. And it went dramatically up, and it's never come down. And yeah, your comment about your friend was interesting. Your former friend, that was interesting discussion you had.
Yeah, and that bothers me that people don't seem to be able to look at the individual that they knew 30 years ago and realize some people can go off the rails, and that other people are being hurt by this.
Sure.
It's not just this person who's going to he may be spending a lot of his days behind bars from here on out, but it seems that people are unable to understand that, maybe because they don't see the person who died from this drug, or who was greatly impaired by this drug, or who lost their family by this drug, or who had a bankruptcy by it, because we don't know any of those people, or we don't think we know any of those people.
Right. And you mentioned, the danger of running a meth lab. Obviously, there are just physical dangers of that. They blow up sometimes. They create noxious poison within the house. If you have a family and children and a wife and a nephew who's living in that house, they're all breathing in poison all day long. And then let's say you run the safest meth lab in the business, and you aren't going to blow it up, and you're not breathing in poison. What are you doing with your product? I mean, you're selling it to people who, if you're not poisoning them, you're also destroying their lives. You're destroying their children's life. The thought that meth dealers are somehow some kind of Robin Hood is shocking to me. I mean, it's an entirely greedy business. It's a business that's run by people who have no concern whatsoever for, their customers or society at large. And so you really aren't talking about a harmless enterprise here. And, that's why we have laws against it. And hopefully in their rush to empty the prisons, at least in Idaho, nobody says that this is a crime that shouldn't be punished.
In fact, when they see a customer die, then they have to go out and recruit new customers in order to continue to make their living that way.
Yeah. And, with methamphetamine, it isn't the way heroin and cocaine are. It isn't a drug that you often see fatal overdoses with. I mean, that you do sometimes, but not nearly as often as those other drugs. So, a meth customer is a meth customer for a long time. They don't usually die, but they're shells of people. I mean, I see what's happened to some of these people when, we see them in drug court, and we see them when they come back again and again and again, and they have a lot of trouble with their lives because they've become hooked on this drug. And that's the fault of the drug dealer. Obviously the purchaser and the user bears some responsibility for his own life, but the drug dealer shouldn't be looked at as some kind of innocent person who's just doing it because he needs the money.
Got more with Grant Loebs coming up. He's the Twin Falls County Prosecutor. In the next few minutes, we'll have a short break, and we'll wrap up the program in just a couple of, in the next segment. If you have a question or comment, remember you can reach us at 736-0300. You're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX. and newsradio1310.com. Grant Loebs is the Twin Falls County Prosecutor. He joins us in studios. Generally, it was third Tuesday, I guess, of every month, right? Third Tuesday.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I lose track of 1, 2, and 3, 4, but I know it's Tuesday morning once a month. And he's taking some of your telephone calls if you're so inclined as well, too. If you've got a legal question or something you'd like to run by him while he's in the studio with us, this is your opportunity. He's here with us for another 15 minutes. The number 736-0300. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. It's 28 at 9:44, and we do want to point out the telephone calls. In fact, that one right off the top of the break, so you must have spurred something in the last segment of the program. You're up next. You're on the air with the prosecutor. Good morning. All right, the delay is creating a moral hazard for our listening audience out there today.
Good morning, Bill.
Good morning.
I'm sorry I had to call twice in one day, but this topic is so important. It's my understanding that meth made in a bathtub will stay in there for many years, and a child taking a bath later in later years will be affected. Also, the landlords are victims because sometimes it takes more money to repair property after a meth dealer has left than the property is worth.
And again, the long-term effects is what he's addressing.
Right, and the caller is absolutely correct. I mean, if you rent a house to somebody who uses it for a meth lab, you can kiss that house goodbye because the cost of rehabilitating that house might be more than it's worth, and everything in the house, from the wallpaper to the paint to the furniture to the rugs to whatever.
I was going to say, a lot of times you have to demolish the property when it's...
Sometimes, yeah.
And
I mean, there are companies that specialize in meth cleanup, which is a sad statement to make, but yeah, there are companies that specialize in that, and they specialize in going into a place and removing the things that are contaminated and then testing to make sure that the place is habitable afterwards. So it all depends. I mean, it's possible that it's so bad that you can't use the house, but many of them can be fixed.
I was going to say,
but at enormous cost.
The government's not covering that cost. That's the homeowner's cost, isn't it? So the homeowner may make that decision. It's just better to pull the place down.
Perhaps.
We want to point out Grant Loebs is in the studio with us. It's 9:46, and you're listening to News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. We didn't touch on it yet, but I dropped you a line a few days ago or the last couple of days about mandatory sentencing guidelines, which one of the reasons we have this standoff in Oregon going on right now, which is now into its going into its fourth week, is because the real gist of this is if the two ranchers had not been sent back to prison by the Court of Appeals, no one would be talking about this, and it simply would have gone away. But because the judge initially thought that the sentencing was too harsh for their actions, he threw out the mandatory. And in federal court, that's a serious thing. When you have a mandatory sentence, you're supposed to serve that. And so that may be the whole nub of this. We may have avoided this altogether. Without a mandatory, he could have just said, look, this is a reasonable sentence, and we would never have heard about it again.
Perhaps, and I don't know for sure. I mean, the people that were convicted did get ordered to do some prison, and they did some prison, and then the prosecutor there appealed the sentencing because the judge gave an illegal sentence, and judges aren't allowed to do things illegally any more than the rest of us. And if the federal law says that for this crime the sentence is this, and the judge deliberately ignores that, he should expect that he's going to get appealed, and he should expect that he's going to get overturned. And that's what happened in this case. Federal law has a lot of mandatory minimums. It's a system that's structured around a grid where if you are convicted of this crime, you have this many priors, and you have a gun on you and XYZ, you just look at the chart and you find out what the sentence is going to be. It gives you a range. And so there are a lot of mandatory minimums in federal sentencing. Now, in Idaho, there are very few. There are some, and some of them have to do with some drug crimes. There are mandatory minimums for murder. There are a few others here and there, but basically our system is one where the judge has a lot of discretion, and the law gives the judge a span of years in which he can give a sentence that he believes is appropriate up to a certain number. And the judge in Idaho is required to give his own mandatory minimum, essentially. He's required to say, for this crime, you'll do up to 10 years in prison, which means after that time you're released. But you must do 5 years before you're eligible for parole. And that's the way the judge, in a individualized fashion, gives a mandatory minimum on that case. But he could give lower or higher. It's up to him. But he's required to specify the number of years you must serve and the number of years that that you might serve as a maximum.
I was in a federal court one time when a judge by the name of Neil McKern, who's probably long retired, he was sentencing two fellows who had robbed an armored car company and one of the biggest heists in history. But they didn't realize it was the biggest, and so they were just throwing the money out as they drove down the road because they realized they were in serious trouble. And the judge actually apologized to one of the young men, saying, "I've got to send you away for 8 years. I don't think it's fair, but I've got to do it because of mandatory minimum." And then the defendant started to cry, and the judge said, "Oh, don't worry about it. You'll be a young man when you get out."
Yeah.
It was one of the more bizarre scenes I've ever seen in a courtroom.
Yeah, I've seen that happen before, where judges say things like that, and it's not very good deterrent when the judge is apologizing for the fact that he has to sentence somebody. And that sounds like what happened in this Oregon case, where the judge who gave the initial sentence, just ignored the mandatory minimum and said, you're 73, I think one of them's 73, and you're 40 years old and you don't have a big criminal record, so I'm not going to send you away. But the crime itself that they were convicted of is a fairly serious crime. And it wasn't just one incident, it was multiple incidents. And, you can't just go around burning stuff and expect that, it's never going to do any harm and you're not going to get caught. And, arson in Idaho, as in the federal system, it's a significant crime.
I've got a follow-up to that, but I want to squeeze a telephone caller in here. It's 9:51, and you're up next. You're on KLIX with Grant Loebs.
Hey, good morning, gentlemen. I had a brief question for the prosecutor regarding burglaries and theft. I noticed when I read the 5th and 6th judicial court appearances in the paper, 99% of the time it's dismissed by prosecutor if it's anything less than a drug or alcohol charge. Can you explain why that takes place when we have these great technologies out there to capture these people on camera and so forth?
Before you hang up, I don't want you to go before I ask you. 99% of the time, what are you saying happens?
That it seems like when I read through there, if it's not drug or alcohol related, it'll say dismissed by prosecutor for home theft, burglaries, theft, retail theft, so on and so forth. It seems to me that the focus is primarily on the drugs and alcohol, and we're not being very proactive on, crime watch and home and business security.
I just wanted to make sure I understood what your question was. All I can say is I don't know what he's reading. There is a column that's printed in the paper about 5th District Court. That also includes, of course, all the 5th District counties, Gooding, Jerome, Camas, Lincoln, Blaine, Twin Falls, Minidoka, and Cassia. But I don't want to throw any of those people under the bus either, because I don't think that it's true that in any county in Idaho, 99% of the non-drug crimes are dismissed. We have about 700 felonies in Twin Falls County every year. And a lot of those are drug crimes, and a lot of those then are other crimes. And we get convictions in probably 95+% of those cases. Sometimes a case is dismissed running up to the preliminary hearing, and then it'll be reported in the paper that it's dismissed, and then it's either refiled or sometimes there's a continuance, and so the hearing isn't held. But I don't even know what to say about that. It just isn't the case.
I want to thank him for the call. Back to Oregon. Yes, they were convicted because of arson fires, but as I was reading the story initially, they were convicted under a terrorism charge, and that's where I think a lot of us
see. I don't think that's true. And I don't claim to be an expert on this, and I'm not a U.S. attorney, so these are federal crimes, not state crimes. But according to the news reports at the time that followed the trial, according to the U.S. attorney who prosecuted it, these people were never accused of anything having to do with terrorism and weren't convicted of that and weren't sentenced on that. But again, if somebody claims to know the facts and details,
Right.
that's fine. But I've not been able to find any source that is official that says that they were accused or convicted of anything relating to terrorism.
Do we sometimes, though, see a law that is put in place to fight RICO, for instance, was to go after drug dealers, but then later on it was used in some attempts to use it against the pro-life movement. And so we see a law originally created to fight one ill, and then somebody says, aha, we can turn around and use it in a particular case. And it almost seems overreach, I think, to a lot of us when we hear about those stories.
Well, possibly. I mean, you're right. RICO was it's an organized crime statute, really. It's designed to make it illegal for people to band together to further a large criminal conspiracy in a criminal organization, whether it be organized crime or drug dealers or whatever. But the statute itself doesn't say must be drug crime, must be organized crime. It talks about a group of people banding together and each doing his part to further a large criminal enterprise. And so if you're a prosecutor and if you see a large criminal enterprise of any kind that is contributed to by a bunch of people, then you can look to that statute to help you prosecute it. So if the legislature wants to make it more narrow, of course they can. They could always say the provisions in the RICO statute are only apply to methamphetamine production and sales or whatever. But whether it's overreach or not, I mean that is obviously for the legislature to decide those things. And there are a lot of crimes that are technically on the books that nobody enforces or prosecutes, and there are some crimes on the books that people disagree with. Drug crime being one of them. People think it should be okay to create drugs and smoke pot and do meth and do whatever as long as you're, quote, not hurting anybody else. But the problem with that is often you are hurting other people.
Got about 90 seconds, so we'll see if we can squeeze a question and answer in that limited time. Otherwise, we'll have to do it all over again next month. You're on the air with the prosecutor.
Yeah, Grant, I think you may have misunderstood the previous caller. He was saying that burglaries and petty theft stuff was being dismissed, not the drug ones.
Right, and my point was it is not. You may be able to find a burglary or a petty theft, and petty theft would be different. That's not a felony that is being dismissed. But I'm saying that the overwhelming, massive majority of burglaries and robberies and grand thefts in Twin Falls are not only prosecuted, but are prosecuted to a conviction. On any given day, you may be able to cite one that was dismissed, but what you're probably seeing is that there are a lot more drug crimes than there are burglaries than there are grand thefts, because the drug crime is by far the most prevalent crime in Twin Falls County. But I invite anybody who wants to look at this, come to my office and I'll show you the actual statistics. 95+% of burglaries and grand thefts result in convictions in Twin Falls County.
Got about 30 seconds to go. We should point out, too, that a lot of these cases, people plea, and
Sure.
That's a conviction itself. But I mean,
Right.
it might be a little confusing that if someone decides to plea down.
Right, and of course that's counted in the statistic I just gave you. I mean, if somebody pleads guilty, then they're guilty. They just saved everybody a trial, but that doesn't mean the case is dismissed. They're guilty by their plea.
And many times it's one of the best tools you have is.
Sure, without that we wouldn't have a functioning criminal system or a functioning court system.
We'll see you again in, February.
It's great to be here. Thank you. Welcome back.
Well, beats working for a living.
Yeah.
You're the guy who has 16-hour days and the like.
Thanks a lot.
9:58. Bill Colley with you, and want to thank Grant Loebs for joining us in studio this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and NewsRadio1310.com. Fox News is up next at 10 o'clock, followed by Rush Limbaugh. God willing, if the creek don't rise, I'll get to do this all over again tomorrow morning between 8 and 10 o'clock.